Lemon Amiga present. A Playguide video review. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Hey there, once again. This week it gives me great pleasure to introduce another Playguide and review. This time we're taking a look at Prehistorik, developed by Movie Interactive Software and published by Titus in the summer of 1991. The game begins with some suitable music and some suitable instruction screens to introduce us to this game, and with some cartoon graphics it introduces the player to the fact that this game is meant to be cartoon action fun. Strangely, this introduction does not load if you manage to fail the game, so this is the first and the last time the player will get to see this. Pressing the fire button will take us on to another presentation screen where we find our hero Prehistorik dreaming of food, and the aim of this game is to collect food and attack the monsters on the level, and gifted with his prehistoric intelligence he sets out on his quest to fill his stomach. Let's press fire and check this game out. And as we do so, it will load each level from the disc, which does take some time, so let's skip that and introduce ourselves to level 1. Prehistorik is a flip screen platformer, and by moving to the edge of that screen it will then flick to the next one, where we can find monsters. By pressing the fire button wildly, we can hit those monsters over the head, and by pushing up on the controller we can even explore these caves. The monsters at this point will not fire any weapons towards us, and they're fairly easy to knock out. But every monster collected will add to the food meter you can see right at the top of the screen, and once that food meter is absolutely full, then we can move on to the second level. To help us, we will also find a warrior chief guide, and the warrior chief appears in the form of a spirit guide hovering somewhere above this level. And if we'd have taken a big leap off the edge of the previous platform, we'd have gone on to that level, but it's sometimes at random where that warrior appears, and our guide won't always give us the best weapons either. And we managed to miss that one. Sometimes they just disappear, and you just do not have the time to collect those. So let's explore the caves, and of course fire in this game will wipe out our energy. You can see the energy bar in the top left corner is pretty full at the moment. We cannot collect energy on the level, and so we'll have to survive all the way to the end. We start with a basic club, and we can also upgrade those as we continue. Our guide will give us extra weapons as well as bombs and things like that. So at this stage it's important to move from screen to screen, clearing out as much as you can from every one of those, and sometimes at the back of these caves you'll find extra bonus items such as extra lives. So at this stage it's certainly worth exploring and removing all the obstacles in our way. Like all platformers, the player will have to negotiate jumps and avoid certain items which cannot be killed, but usually everything that moves on this level can be killed, and the aim of the game is simply to club everything to death and collect as much food as possible. So the clubbing to death aspect never gets boring, and we never lose our club either. You can see a sign that's a no entry sign, and some of those exits will lead all the way back to the start of the level, and you'll have to go through the level again. There are also clocks, and you can see a timer in the top right corner. Yes, we have got a time limit on this level, and you'll be surprised to know that I actually had a practice run of this game before I even started this review, and I ran out of time on the first level. In here we find our first weapon, a Stone Age axe, and you can see that energy is already bottoming out. Sometimes jumping over this fire is pixel perfect, and you have to make a running jump over that, and because we cannot collect any energy, we'll just have to survive on the lives we are given. Surprisingly, the first level of this game is the hardest, given the fact that we only have a few lives, and there are lots of enemies here to sap those away, including the monkeys who throw coconuts, which are very hard to defeat, and it's certainly a case of hammering that fire button like crazy. I remember playing this with the auto fire, but this is not with the auto fire. I'm actually hammering that fire button. With the auto fire, it's a much easier game, of course. So let's just collect some more time, so we have a lot more time on this level, and take our time to clean these out. I think the music in the background is great, and if we increase the volume of that music, we'll find that the music is pretty low in the soundtrack of this game, and that's a shame, because the music is one of the best parts of it. Colliding with too many things will of course sap our lives, and we're down to 2 now, and so hopefully let's try to make it to the end of this level. If you can, then we can pick up further lives on the later levels, and they aren't so bad. It's important to get stuck into those enemies, and if you have the auto fire, it's possible to hold down fire and simply move the joystick left or right, and the enemy will wander into a club, but hopefully before it's robbed too much energy. And some of those enemies will fire fireballs towards us. The yellow enemies are notoriously hard to hit, so it's best to wade into those, but you can see the energy is already petering out once again. Luckily we've picked up an extra life, and here is another one, so that puts us back up to 4. At this stage you can see the game is very easy, and it's certainly one of those games to appeal to the younger audience, although it's not so very easy. You can get away with certain things. Unfortunately you cannot climb the ladders unless you start at the base of those, but the fact that it gives us extra time and extra lives means this game is actually very playable and can actually be very fun despite getting murdered by all these enemies. Once each enemy has been clubbed, it will sit on its laurels for a while, and then you can touch that thing, and also an arrow will appear over its head, and if you do collide with the enemy, that will not respawn. But sometimes collecting an enemy will force a respawn from the next cave entrance, so you have to move away from every cave entrance and hit those as they emerge. You may notice our food meter is now all the way at the top, and that means we can avoid most of these enemies. Unfortunately, we cannot destroy the spirit guide unless he's on the same level as us, and picking up the clock has teleported us back 1 screen, which isn't too bad. At least we don't have to go through the entire level all over again. With that amount of time and this 1 screen to go before we get to the end of the level, we can simply defeat the last few of these bears, which will emerge, and if we take our time from here, then the end of the level is in the bag. So let's not waste any more time collecting fruit. Let's just move on to the final screen. you can see those balloons, and the graphics in this game are actually pretty well done, not as well drawn as Ruffian that we've seen already. And colliding with those balloons means it's level complete. At the end of each level, the player will also get some bonus score, and some bonus depending on the lives that they have remaining. So the score piling up there. Unfortunately, there is no high score table in this game, but at least it gives you the score at the end of each level. And again, the levels do take time to load off the disc, and level 2 is actually the first boss that we'll find in this game. On level 2, all we have to do is hammer at the foot of this dinosaur like crazy, and you can see the energy drops out like a stone, and if we defeat all the other animals, we'll get a nice animated cutscene. And I think this injects a great level of humour into Prehistorik. And it's one of my favourite games on the Amiga, even though it is quite a small game and a very easy game. I think the graphics stand up for themselves. The music is somewhat great, and it's got great sound effects as well, although the sound effects are actually overpowering, and you either have to turn up the volume so they have the music at the correct volume and the sound effects very loud, or you have to turn those down. On level 3, we are taken to the customary ice world, but unlike many platforming ice world antics, no, there is no slip sliding around involved in this game. And yet again, this game is more or less for kids, and so there is nothing tricky or difficult here, and all the player has to do is to move from screen to screen, clear everything out. And on level 2, the food becomes a little tighter, and so you have to knock out more of these guys to collect the food. Remember to jump over these platforms, because if you run from the edge, you'll simply fall down one of these pits of death, and that's a lesson that the player has to learn the hard way. And I'm just hanging around to see if there's any spirit energy knocking around. That is actually on a random timer, and sometimes our spirit guide will appear long into the screen. And when that appears, you have to run like heck to get there, just in case that guide has a better weapon. If you fail to reach that guide in time, then you won't get anything. There's no two ways about it. Added to the usual variety of goodies on the level, we'll also find wine glasses and cocktails, chicken legs, and also bottles of milk, although they only tend to give us a few hundred score. Usually the main source of food is the animals themselves, and these walruses are a prime example. You can see their enemy patterns are at random, so sometimes you have to wait for those, and timing isn't always necessary in this game. But you can see we are on 6 lives at the moment. But it's best not to be too gung-ho, because if you touch those rocks before destroying those, that's another life over, and so you have to make sure that every enemy and every rock is depleted before you walk into that. And these swordfish, and fish in general, you can't actually shoot, but these Percy penguins are actually a little menace, because many of those pour out. And in here we actually find another upgrade, a spring. These jumps aren't difficult, but with a spring it just makes that job a lot easier. And if you time these things correctly, as usual, then you'll find jumping along these hazards isn't very hard at all. and so this game isn't very hard, and it encourages the player every step. There are no unfair deaths except for the pits of death if you end up wandering in those, and as long as you keep clubbing, then you should find an easy ride. Once again, I feel it's a shame that this great music takes a backseat to the sound effects, and if you collect too many items in a row, it simply sounds like hiccups. So let's use a mod file and let's put the background music over the sound effects to give an example of what the music could have sounded like in this game. Strangely, given a Neolithic beat to this music, it sounds more like honky tonk to me, and it sounds like this music was created using an old ragtime piano. Perhaps Scott Joplin would be very at home with this music, but in the Stone Age perhaps not. You can see a hang glider there, and we have used airborne tactics already in this game. While contact with that hang glider will mean that we can float over the level. Again, the food meter takes longer to increase on the second level, but you can see an extra life there. You can see we've taken hits already, so there's no harm risking energy to get that extra life. And those fires are a real pain to jump over, so if I collide with those, I usually ignore them and continue. See a signpost for level 5, even though we're only on level 3, and there are only 4 levels in this entire game. If you ignore all the boss fights, you'll find a boss at the end of every level, and a humorous fight will then ensue, but for the most part it's a case of jumping and killing all these enemies, and a great snowman just adds to the humour of this game. It also helps to have a great joystick with a very fast fire button, and I guess you could use a D-pad for this game, but basically anything that it requires is to ram that fire button. And of course, if you have rapid fire or auto fire or an emulation, you can switch on the auto fire, and that makes this game a dawdle. Yes, you can complete this game first time every time, as long as you are dedicated to it. But look at that, a dead end and an extra weapon takes us all the way back in the level, and now we have to go through half of the level all over again. If we mistime a leap, it's great that this program actually lets us off and recenters us back on that platform, and I know some platformers, if you miss that leap by a pixel, then that's game over. Just to give you a little history behind this game, the designer listed on the Lemon website is Cybele, and on other websites the design team is actually listed as Cybele, and in some magazine reviews as well. No idea who Cybele is, and he's only appeared on this one game. The code was created by Olivier Diaz. Unfortunately, that's written Diaz Olivier on the Lemon Amiga website, and he went on to design the amazing Ubisoft game Rayman 2: The Great Escape in 1999. The graphics were created by Jean-Christophe Alessandri, and he went on to provide graphics for all of the Rayman games, Rayman 1, Rayman 2, Rayman Origins and Rayman Legends, and he also created the graphics for Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon in 2006, and designed games such as Nightmare Busters, which appeared on the SNES in 2013. Unfortunately, we have to make a leap of faith off this platform just to make sure that we survive. The music and the sound effects were both created by Christophe Favre, and he also created music for the Blues Brothers, released in 1991, and also Titus the Fox for Titus, released in 1992. You can see on the Amiga we've made it to the end of the level. Unfortunately, we are 1 point from our full food counter. This would normally be a massive detriment because we can't always go back all the way to the beginning of the level, and if you don't collect those food items, well, sometimes it's a no way back. But taking some health hits here, we can destroy a few items, and all we need is to collect one item to complete the level. Surely in this cave should give us what we need. Unfortunately not. Unfortunately, it isn't possible to leap from ladders either, I don't think, so we'll have to go around a long way, and finally we find a cache of goodies that we need to complete this level. One more pizza in it, and we have 4 more lives. So at this stage you can see the levels are still very easy, the graphics are still functional, not amazingly well done, but functional, and look at that, we ran out of time. And there are 1 or 2 things which will kill us, the energy and the time limit, and if we run out of food or don't collect the food enough at the end and we have to backtrack, then that's another waste of that time. But you can see the enemies stay dead, all these snowmen are no longer with us, and so all we need to do once again is to hit that hang glider, and we've completed that level. Hopefully it's even possible to hit this guy from below the platform, even though it's not possible to do that with the spirit guides. Whenever we die, we'll see our angel disappearing into the heavens, but we can press fire to skip that embarrassing sequence, and that means we are now on 2 lives to face the 2nd level boss. I think it's great that the game provides bosses, some of the hugest bosses I've ever seen on the Amiga, and some of the most tricky and fun to beat as well. And I really appreciate the Rocky theme as well, ripped off from the Rocky movies. You can see the vines creeping everywhere, and the dinosaur, what you have to do is to bounce behind that thing and to hit that on the tail. If you come anywhere in contact with the head region, then of course you will take damage, and of course you can see there is no energy meter. If you take damage, then you're going to die. And eventually, once you hit that thing often enough, that will then give up and give us a ride out of this level. I really do love the animation in this game, and it makes the player feel at home and comfortable, and it rewards the player's progress with some great effects. And defeating those end of level bosses isn't very hard, but then compared to Chuck Rock, when some of those things were a real nightmare, some of these are actually pretty easy. And if you remember, we actually faced one of those guys in Chuck Rock. But now we continue on to another level. This is level 3, known as level 6 in this game. And here we face the forest, and we have to club to death all the inhabitants of it. Once again, some things on this level cannot be killed, like those fly traps you can see at the bottom, and sometimes those snakes as well. But I think you can kill those snakes. Those birds, you can only hit those and knock those back off the level, and so they are a menace rather than something that can be defeated. And you can see squirrels throwing their nuts towards us, and anyone who saw Fox Fights Back on the C64, that's the last time we saw angry squirrels' nuts. So let's just avoid those and trigger another enemy. Of course, the hardest enemy are the ones firing projectiles, and those blonde enemies are a real pain. So let's enter the tree, and yes, there are sub-levels, none on this platform I'm afraid, but there are sub-levels that we can climb, and it's important to climb through a tree to get through this one. Look at the size of that crane. Somebody's definitely having a laugh with these graphics. I really do appreciate the expressions of pain registered on all the faces of the enemies as you beat them up, and if enough pain registers they'll eventually collapse into a heap, and then you can touch those. And the cranes are difficult of course because they're quite tall, you have to hit those in the head, and that means you have to jump up, and sometimes jumping into danger is certainly easy to do. And those fly traps, of course, you cannot be killed, so sometimes you have to avoid many enemies on the screen at the same time. Even these tall trees in this game are drawn with an immense amount of detail. You can see the knot work on the tree is amazing, and even inside the tree, no, it's not a boring background like Yogi's big cleanup that we saw, and detail has gone into this game to make it extra special. And I feel it's a shame that you can't kill these spiders. Surely the weakest enemy on this entire game, a spider, should be very easy to kill indeed. But unfortunately you can't. That shield didn't last very long, and you can see sometimes we are under attack from those random enemies. Sometimes it isn't even possible to defeat those without taking on some kind of damage. But on this screen it's important to observe the arrow. Yes, this tree stump does rise, and we have to use this to shortcut the level. Once again, the music is rather honky-tonk in this level, so let's just overlay a remix of that to prove what a honky-tonk track it is. Music layered over the background sounds, you can tell what a great game this could have been, and very atmospheric as well. The music really caps off a great game, and a game like this is no different. I just wish that this game had more levels, because we are already halfway through the game and there is only one level to go after this. So this is the second leap of faith in the game, and thankfully there aren't too many of those. It's a very sad element when a platformer has to rely on leaps of faith, but it's very easy to progress and we don't really get lost in this game. This is not a maze, and thank goodness for that. now we're reaching the end of this level, and our food meter is virtually up to the top. Just these last few items should complete that quota, and it doesn't give you 100%, you just have to notice when that bar is full, like that, and hopefully with 2 lives remaining, hopefully we should be able to ascend this level. And is that another leap of faith? Well, kind of, because one platform leads on to another, but you can see this game could have been much harder, and certainly takes it easy on the player. And here we are at the final screen. Knock out this crane and it will teleport us down to the base of this well constructed tree and on to the next level. Level 6 sees the third boss, and it's one of the tallest bosses that I've ever seen in an Amiga game. Now we have to use our trampoline to hit that guy in the face, and one contact with that massive club will lose a life. We don't have too many lives at this stage, so we'll have to make sure that every hit counts. Timing is critical, especially when you only have 1 life remaining. So let's take our time and let's try to knock out the final bit of energy on this boss. I guess this is yet another Sylvester Stallone reference in an Amiga game, and we last saw Sylvester in Nitro, and he's also been in a whole selection of other games as well, including Dogs of War. But for now, let's skip on to the final level of the game, which again takes some time to load, so we'll skip that. And now we find ourselves in the caves. The object of the game is to rescue enough food to feed the family, and these are the family caves, so hopefully at the end of all of this we should find our home brood so that we can deliver our goodies. Managed to miss the spirit guide on this screen, but you can hear the music has changed again, and of all the musics in this game I feel this is the most tribal, and it sounds like they've used samples from the movie Crocodile Dundee. Certainly the Crocodile Dundee movies were high in the charts at this time of the game's release, and if you remember times when films didn't try to be too aggressive and didn't try too hard, well, this is a game that's not very aggressive and doesn't try too hard either, and it's all the better for it because it's much friendlier, and I feel that this game is very accessible to most players. In general, I find this game has bags of character and mysterious charm. Even though it's only a small game and perhaps a juvenile game, this playability just makes the gameplay stand out even stronger. There's no point having a game that's too hard and too frustrating when all you want is just fast platforming action. The game does not take liberties with the player's intelligence, and of course there are very few of those pits of death. You can see those on the screen here, and some of those require us to jump down, but there are very few pits of death and leaps of faith and no round robins, so the game does play fair. On this final level, you won't gain any score by destroying the people. No well, not even any food from that either. But you can collect food once again in these caves, and it's a very familiar format from the first level. So this game is quite predictable, and by the time you get this far, quite easy. Moving on to the scores of this game, and I've probably never seen a more mixed bag when it comes to scores. Most magazines originally gave this in the 70s, but severely changed their mind when it came to the budget re-release. This game was originally around 25 quid, which is lots of money for this kind of game, and I think 14 would have been a lot better money to spend on this, maybe even a $9.99 budget label. The One magazine originally gave this release 72%, but by the time it came to the re-release they only gave it 30%, calling the game boring and tedious. Amiga Force gave the game 40% in the same issue as it gave Crazy Cars 2 36%, which is a joke, and they called this game primitive. Moving on, Amiga Action originally gave this 85%, even though they gave the re-release 53%. See Amiga gave it 72%, but the budget release 59%. Ace gave it 68%, Amiga Format gave it 68%. The current score on the Lemon Amiga website is 70%. Amiga Computing gave this game 70%. The One, as I say, gave it originally 72%. Zero gave it 72%, and Amiga Power gave this game 73%. So Amiga Action, with its original score of 85%, was the highest. They said the graphics, the sound and the gameplay were all outstanding, and yet they changed their minds severely for the re-release. That gives Prehistorik an average score of 6.5 out of 10. And I think I got more enjoyment out of this playthrough than I did from Ruffian, and because it's a very short and easy game, it definitely rewards the player and gives them more joy and more satisfaction. Returning to the Amiga, we've managed to miss a platform, and that gives us 0 lives. Moving on to the final few screens of this game, and it's important to collect those lives and to aim on target. And in here, well, we'll find a few more fruit goodies. We have our food level on maximum, but in here we find the extra life that we need, and that should surely write our ticket through to the end of this game. In conclusion, I think this game is perfect for young players. Even though they go around clubbing things to death, it's certainly a lot better than the violent shooters that we get these days. It certainly gives a lot to the cartoon atmosphere and doesn't patronise the player and doesn't make them sweat for no reason. The graphics are cartoony and the music is fun in itself, and it's certainly not bluegrass. So continuing, I find that this is actually quite a good game, and even though the average score was 6.5 out of 10, my personal score for this would be actually 7.5 out of 10. It would be an 8 if there were only one more level, and I find 4 levels is quite small considering the full price release that this game was released at. But hopefully it was a major release for Titus, and Titus Software didn't release too many bad games on the Amiga. On the Amiga you can see we've made it to the final screen, and on the final screen you have to make sure that you touch those guys after you knock them down, otherwise they'll keep getting up again and again. this is the final door, and through here we should find our family, and entering that we will gain our final score. Unfortunately, there is no high score table in this game, which is unfortunate, but it will then provide us with our high score. And then we will move on to the final cutscene, where we are reunited with our tribe. I find the ending sequence is a little anticlimactic, and the parrot there looks absolutely scared to death. The woman looks like she's balancing 2 coconuts, and the baby looks like he swallowed a coconut. But apart from that, I feel that this game is well done, and pressing fire will return us back to the intro when we are sitting on a tree and we have to go out and do the thing all over again. So thank you very much for watching a play guide and a review to this Amiga game, and I hope to see you again for another one next week.